This is my dad, Dwight Matheson, and I'm interviewing him for the Cold War that he was in.
Hi, I'm glad to be here, and I hope I can answer the questions that are asked to the best of my knowledge.
All right. What was the cause of the Cold War?
Well, the Cold War was a confrontation that was against America and the Soviet Union, which was Russia. And the reason why it was called the Cold War, because there wasn't a lot of activity when it came to deaths and that kind of thing. There were several deaths, but they were not publicized type deaths. If it was international, then it was always blamed on an accident. And anyway, I'll let you ask the second question.
Who did we go up against?
We went up against the Soviet Union or Russia. They had thermonuclear bombs, and we had thermonuclear bombs, which are called ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missiles. And just to show you the magnitude of how large they are, and like the hydrogen bomb that was dropped in Hiroshima, and then the second one that was dropped in Nagasaki during World War II and destroyed the whole cities. They are the detonators that set off the thermonuclear devices. We call them re-entry vehicles because they go up into outer space and they go through a certain hole in space that's precise. Then they come down and they're guided down to their target. And when they land, they generate, when they blow up, for example, if one of them were to detonate, because they're so large, the ones that were detonated in Japan, both of them back in World War II, were detonated at about 20,000 feet to cause massive destruction to buildings and that kind of stuff, but it was also designed so that there was very little destruction when it came to fallout and that kind of stuff. But what we have today are in the megatons, millions of tons of TNT. And if they were to drop one, a Russian were to drop one near Hill Air Force Base, and we have 3 live ICBMs, Minuteman IIIs, at HETF, Hill Engineering Test Facility at Hill Air Force Base. And so we are a target. Everything would disappear in a mushroom cloud from Brigham City all the way down through Ogden, all the way down through Salt Lake and into Provo, would go up into the mushroom cloud. Now the mushroom cloud, because there's so much power in back of the ones that we have today, would the temperature goes up to around 23 million degrees, which is hotter than the surface of the sun. So all cement, all rebar, all metal, everything would melt down. The only thing that wouldn't melt down is dirt. And there would be a lot of dirt and dust that would also go up into the cloud, and everything would become radioactive because they use plutonium 235 or some other derivatives of it that are even more powerful. And then that cloud would, just one cloud, could affect half the United States and kill people for thousands and thousands of people. And anyway, go on to the next question if you'd like.
How did it affect you?
How did it affect me? I worked in the area that we have just been talking about for over 20 years, and we had to make sure, and I had over 2,000 people that worked for me at the time when I was at the peak of my profession, and I was at the general level, and we just made sure that all of our ICBMs, there's Minuteman III and Peacekeeper, according to the START talks, those were talks between the United States and Russia that limited and described what size of nuclear weapons, thermonuclear weapons, not nuclear, but thermonuclear weapons could be used. And we had to get rid of all of our Minuteman IIs and just have Minuteman IIIs and Peacekeepers. And Minuteman III has 3 re-entry vehicles or warheads on them. So you shoot one up and they can drop in 3 different areas. The Peacekeeper has 10 per missile. And like at Cheyenne, Wyoming, there are 50 Peacekeeper missiles, which equals 500 different sites that we can bomb if we wanted to. And Peacekeeper is very, very accurate, really, really accurate. And I worked in that area. And I spent a lot of time going over to Europe, Germany, different places. And I remember going on a 6-month or a 6-week TDY trip. I went on several of them, but one specific one where I spent 4 weeks in Heidelberg, Germany. And there were 2 towers there. One was a U.S. tower, and the other one was a German tower. But they were located on what they called Königsstuhl. Königsstuhl in German means the king's throne, or it's the highest peak in Germany. And our tower and the trees over there it's just magnificent how green and beautiful it is. But the tree tops, the average tree was 110 feet high. Just everywhere the trees were 110 feet high. And so we would go up with our biconical antennas and different antennas, different instrumentation, up a spiral staircase up the middle of this tower. And at the first level, there were 4 levels, and the first level was 110 feet. And it was just at the tree line. And we were approximately about 30 miles from East Germany, and that was East Berlin and West Berlin was where the wall was. And that's what divided our 2 civilizations, the America and all our allies and the Russians. And they protected that wall very closely, and if anybody went over it, the Russians would kill them immediately. And so they had armed guards there all the time. And if anybody did make it over, we were prepared to extract them immediately. But anyway, I would go up on, sometimes I would set up antennas, because I went over with a team of about 14 technicians, and we set up antennas that pointed towards East Germany so we could monitor their communications. And I'd go up to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th level. But whenever you went out there, the wind was so strong that as you opened the door, you had a great big leather belt that was strapped around you, and there was a great big metal, it was almost like a handrail that went around the platform, and you had to hook up to that metal thing. And then if I walk straight out, like I was walking off of, and I was walking off of the platform, right at the end, just before I would hit the end, was the end of the leather strap. Leather strap was about 4 inches in diameter, and very, very thick and very strong. But anyway, I remember we spent days up there, and we could listen to the Russians, and we would jam their communications, and they would do the same thing to us. And we would go over there during Reforger. That was an operation where the French, the English, the Canadians, the Australians, everybody got involved. And they'd bring tanks over, and we would pretend like we were going to war. And the Russians on the east side would pretend like we're going to war. And then we would start jamming their communications and everything. And I remember looking down the cobblestone streets. They're just stone streets, they're not paved streets over there. But anyway, and there was only room for one-way traffic, for one car to park on one side, and they had cars parked all over, and then you could drive down one car, one lane. And then there was room for parking on the next between the buildings. And I actually remember some of the English and Canadian tanks and the French tanks. They were ordered to be at a certain place at a certain location, and they would take their tanks the shortest route, and they would go down these narrow streets, and they would run over every one of the cars and smash them flat. They had orders, and that was just the way it was. And the West Germans wanted us there because they were so close to being in harm's way that they would clean up the mess after we got done, and we created a lot of mess. But anyway, there was one day in particular when I was up there. We had 3 shifts going around the clock. I was ahead of all 3 shifts, and I was the main engineer in charge of all the data that was extracted and all that kind of stuff, and gathering all the information that needed to be extracted. But on this particular, it was probably around 1 o'clock, just after noon. I was up on, I think, the 3rd level, and the sun was up and all that kind of stuff. But I remember looking out towards, out towards the East German border where the Russians were, and all of a sudden I could see a little pin, it looked like a pin dot, and it was coming my way. And what it was Foxbat 25. That's a Russian carbon copy of our F-15s. And it was really strange because all the jets that we had designed and everything, the Russians would come up with the exact same design. So that meant that we had arms dealers that were breaking the law and selling top secret information to the Russians so that they could build the same type of technology as we did. And we were a lot further ahead than they were. And our economy was such that we could pay and buy and build the equipment and airplanes and tanks and the things required in case we needed to go to war. But it was breaking the Russians back. Their economy, everybody was starving. They were having the hardest time and everything else. But anyway, as this thing approached, and it was flying at 110 feet, it was flying just over the trees. He came in at Mach 2, which is, Mach is the speed of sound, which is over 800 miles an hour. And I would say it was Mach 2 to Mach 3. But and they have what they call afterburners in their jet engines, and that's what gives them a lot of push that makes them fly so fast. And he was coming at about, I would say about 2,500 miles an hour, which is extremely fast. And he went between the 2 towers. And down from the towers, I could look down and I could see the city of Heidelberg. And he went through, and boy, we had to plug our ears immediately. We were trying to telephone into our base that there was a imminent threat from the Russians, and it was here, and we needed to respond to it by sending up our aircraft and shooting it down in our territory. We could not shoot it down in their territory. And I remember watching the Russian jet as it went down into Heidelberg, did a couple of circles around in Heidelberg, around the American airport, where, or the naval installation, not naval, but Army, and well, the Air Force installations and that kind of thing. And then it came back up and it flew right between us again, and then right in back of them. And we could not call our own people because the Russians were better at jamming than we were. And we couldn't get a hold of our people and tell them, hey, there's an enemy jet that has flown into our territory. We need to scramble 2 jets up and go after him and shoot him down immediately out of the air with our smart missiles and smart bombs. And he came back and he flew between the 2 towers, and as he flew through, it was just moments later, and 2 of our up to the state of the art, I'm not sure what they were at the time, they might have been Phantoms, which was used over in Vietnam, was the main workhorse when it came to fighters and F-16s. But anyway, we're in back of him, but we were in back of him by probably about 25 miles. And so I sat there and I watched them as they went by, and I watched the Russian jet go right over the border, and then I could see our 2 jets, and they looked just like little tiny dots. And as they hit the border line, which we could not go over, or they had the right to shoot us down, and the same thing with them. But I saw both of our jets split up, go right along the border and then circle back and come back. But we were lacking in technology when it came to espionage type activities that we were performing over in Heidelberg at that time. Go ahead.
What do you remember the most about this war?
I just remember there was so much hatred, that flak that was going on. And when I say flak, I mean verbal more than anything. And I actually worked at different times in what they call the war room. And we would send special ops and black ops, different special teams to do different things across the border. And they didn't have any kind of identification or anything, so if they died, no one knew who they were or anything. And I had a capture card, and I could not have on me my official government passport or my official government ID. I had to have what they called a capture card, because if I was captured by the Russians, I was a full bird colonel, and that would put me out into an encampment where the enlisted people were not, and just the high-ranking individuals were. And it was the safest rank to be at. It was a full bird, because generals knew a lot, and they would torture them to get information. And a colonel just didn't have as much information, and you didn't want to be part of the lower enlisted type people and the people that the sergeants and that kind of thing, because they were tortured and beat and all that kind of stuff just for fun. And so
That's sad.
that was the safest way to protect myself. Or, well, that's
Yeah.
what the Air Force determined was the safest way to protect myself.
How did it change your relationships with your family?
Basically, just being away for extended periods of time. And most of the time that I went out on business trips, they were called TDY. And I went on TDY, and I would leave on a Sunday or a Monday and come back on Friday, 3 weeks out of 4 every month. I'd just be able to stay home 1 week a month. And sometimes it was 4 weeks out of the month. But I would go to different contractors that were building different things, and we would make sure that their designs met government specifications and that kind of thing.
How did it change the economy?
Well, any kind of war, World War II or any kind of war, causes the economy. But this one was really different because it was really not an official war. It was what they called the Cold War. And there wasn't a lot of battle and a lot of fighting going on and a lot of death occurring. But it did cause us to be on alert all the time and to keep all of our equipment, our smart bombs and that kind of stuff current. And so we were continually upgrading them, and companies were getting billion-dollar contracts, multi-billion-dollar contracts all over the place. TRW, Boeing, Autonetics, Lockheed Martin, Viacol for boosters, and I could go on and on. There were 15 main contractors that we used. But because of that, it put a lot of tax dollars into the companies and made them grow big, and it caused the economy to grow also, because it created a lot more new jobs and that kind of stuff that we wouldn't have if we weren't in a Cold War state.
What was the Red Scare?
The Red Scare, red denotes Russian, Soviet. And it was just the threat of the Soviets at any time that they could overrun several European cities and start a major war, World War III. And for example, back in the, I think it was the 70s or early 80s, a show came out. It was called War Games, with Matthew Broderick, and he got on his computer supposedly and tapped into the SAC headquarters, the underground. It was where they tracked, and they could watch all Soviet activity from satellites in the basement, they called it. They had big computers and everything, and that's where they would go to DEFCON 1, 2, 3, 4, and that. And if you were at 4, we were at war. And but anyway, in that show, it showed this kid hack into it and play a game, and he played the game of Let's Go to War. And all of a sudden, the machine, the big computer, pretended like it was going to war, and everybody thought it was, and so the DEFCON went up, and we almost went to war in the show because of it. But as a result of the show, the Air Force took it very seriously. That one simple little show, which was very innocent, and we spent over $500 million making sure that that could not happen. And the result of the report that came back from the full investigation to see if anybody could tap into our computer systems and launch thermonuclear devices, even if they were disgruntled employees or and they could launch them into friendly territory like New York or Washington, D.C. or wherever. And was impossible because there was so much manual intervention. People had to flip switches, and because there was so much manual intervention, that prevented anybody from getting onto our computers.
How did it affect the U.S.?
At first, it was kind of a scare for the American public, but as we went on, it just became like everyday normal living. We knew it was there, it was a threat, and we knew that we could repel it if it started. Or when I say repel it, we would send over our own thermonuclear devices. And there is what they call the triad, which is the United States backbone, backbone to our defense. Our whole defense lies around the triad. Now the top of the triad is a triangle. The top of the triad were the ICBMs, the Intercontinental Ballistic Missiles, Minuteman III, and Peacekeeper. And then down in one corner was the SLBMs, the small ICBMs, where we had submarines that could launch at any time if they were ordered to. And they could launch thermonuclear devices out of their submarines. And all this is still going on today to a certain extent. And back then, the B-52 was the main bomber, and it was an extremely large bomber. It even had wheels out on the ends of the wings because it was so large, and it had 8 jet engines in it, and they carried thermonuclear bombs also. And even to this very day and this very moment that I'm talking to you, they are up there right now, way up there, and they're patrolling with stealth bombers, and they are ready to drop thermonuclear devices wherever it's necessary according to the instructions and orders given from the President of the United States and the Pentagon.
How did this war end?
It was really cool the way it ended, because it was really cool. It was kind of sad in a lot of ways because the Russian people and the East Germans and that were so poor and struggling and starving to death and everything because the Russians took every penny they could to build everything they could to just try to keep up with us. Well, we're building refrigerators and we're building stoves and that kind of stuff, plus we're building all the other stuff. We're living normal day lives, and they're not. They're starving to death over there. And it got so bad that they decided, the people got together and they agreed with the government, and they went and they tore down this giant wall that nobody could climb over. And it showed a lot of people, thousands of people with sledgehammers, just bashing at this wall and knocking it down, and then welcoming Americans and the West Germans over into East Berlin, East Germany. And so that, and everybody was just celebrating, and it was one of the happiest days that we've had in history, in fact.
Cool. What are the consequences of the war, like today?
The consequences, it taught us to be alert all the time, even in peace, and to keep our missiles, or I should say the satellite systems that we have that can look down and can see what is going on. In fact, and this was years ago, and they've improved the satellite systems a lot. but I could be down here on the ground with a newspaper, and a satellite could, because it was so powerful, could read the main headings on the newspaper. That's how sophisticated, and if somebody pulled out a gun, they could see that there was a gun in the guy's hand. They could point it anywhere they wanted. And we had polar satellites, and we had different kinds of satellites that would go around in different areas, so we could walk.
All right, I'm Heidi Matheson, and I'm going to be interviewing Sam Allman, and he fought in the World War II. And I'm going to ask you a couple questions, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay, how did this war affect you?
Well, it pretty well changed my life because of the fact that, you know, we were down in San Diego after we graduated from high school and was building bombers, and everybody in America all went to work in the war plants to try and do whatever they could for the war effort, you know, and everybody was out selling bonds, and so we felt we was doing our part by building B-24 bombers down in San Diego.
All right, did the prices of things raise at all?
Oh yes, the big thing, there's a lot of the prices that raised, but the main thing was that there was a scarcity of it.
Yeah.
You couldn't get sugar, you know, that was our big thing. Sugar was rationed, and gasoline was rationed, and tires were rationed. And so that was the big thing that affected us mostly, was the gasoline and the sugar and all these other things, and coffee drinkers. I think the coffee was pretty well rationed, but the beauty part of it, San Diego was close to Tijuana, Mexico, and so we could go down there on the weekends and we could fill up our tanks with gas, and a lot of times that would last us a week.
Yeah.
And so with our gas stamps that we got, they issued gas stamps for us, so as a result we were able to, you know, get around pretty good and do a lot of things that a lot of people couldn't do.
Yeah. How many people did you know that fought in the war?
Well, I really don't have a count of all of them, but there would be thousands. I just want to show you my group, my graduating class, that in the boot camp in San Diego. These are the men that I graduated with, and I lost most of them in the war. I was the only one that survived out of my group because of the fact that I'd learned how to type, and they called me out, and because I'd been building bombers, they put me in a Navy fighter squadron, of which I spent most of all my time during the war in that squadron.
How old were you when this war started?
I was 19.
19.
But
Is that like when you went into the war too?
Yeah, that's when I went into when I joined the Navy. I was 19 then, but it was exciting because of the fact that in the fighter squadrons we get to fly a lot. You know, for a 19-year-old, we used to get flight pay, so we'd fly every chance we got.
Yeah.
There's only one time though that I just about had to take a bath in the San Diego Bay, which I was a little hesitant to do. Because what happened, we had a pilot come in. He was a combat man, and he was up. We were up doing acrobatics and doing everything, and we get up probably 15,000 feet, and we lost the motor. The motor died, and so we were dropping, and all I could see was San Diego Bay coming up, and I'd already had my Saturday night bath, so I didn't. But so I put one foot out on the wing with my parachute and was just ready to jump off, and the pilot says, "Hang on for a minute, hang on." And it just so happened as we dropped about 10,000 feet, the propeller started to turn, and we fell so fast that it started. He got the motor going again.
Yeah.
And so he said, "Hang on." And so I hung on, and I got back in the plane, and I sat on my parachute, and before we hit the water, the plane pulled out.
Wow, cool.
And so we were able to land. But I'd already had my bath, so I didn't
Yeah.
have another bath. But it was an exciting life at that time, you know, for a young 19-year-old to be able to fly and do all these things.
Did your dad fight in the war at all?
My dad didn't. He was classed as essential at the time in the mining industry, and they kept him working in the mines. But my wife's father was in World War I, and he went in on the invasion of France. But he was only over there for a short time, and then the war was over, and he was able to come back. So he really didn't see any, I don't think, too much combat.
How did this war affect the United States?
Well, in a lot of ways, the whole United States pulled together. You know, I think that was the big thing, because everybody, because of the fact that they made a surprise attack, and they killed 2,409 men on the bombing of Pearl Harbor. You know, when they killed all those innocent men, and what it did is it turned America against them, and everybody jumped right in the war effort, and you know, everybody got in selling bonds, all the women, everybody went into the aircraft plants and the military, and we just all pulled together, and I think that the unification of the whole American people, I think, is what won the war.
How long did the war seem to you?
Well, it was, it didn't seem that long to me, although we had 2 years before I went overseas, so we had some great times during that 2 years while I was courting my wife, and we got married, and we had a beautiful church on 10th Street in San Diego, and every Saturday night we were out dancing. You know, we used to have the Saturday night dances at the Ward, and just had a tremendous time. And then Lawrence Webb, which you've probably heard of him,
Yeah.
you know, he's older. They used to play at the Pacific Ballroom in San Diego, and a lot of the gang, we used to always, you know, go to the dances down there, and so
Cool.
we had some great times.
Who won this war?
Well, nobody wins the war. Actually, we actually overcome them. We overcome the Germans and the dictators, and that's the main thing. Everybody lost in the war. We had thousands and thousands of men that were killed going in on the invasion on all the different islands, and you know, it was very costly for everybody. And when you see, of course, the difference between the Americans and the Japanese was the Japanese, that was their glory, was to die for the emperor, you know, so most of them committed suicide, you know, rather than be taken prisoner. And yet all of the prisoners that we took on Okinawa, well, they couldn't believe how good the Americans were to them, because, you know, they didn't do any torture, anything to them like the Japanese tortured our troops and everything that they captured on the Philippine Islands and Guam and the places where there were Americans and Filipinos. But I can show you some of the pictures that I've got on Okinawa, and they were so astounded that we didn't torture and do anything to them. But they lost a lot of men, and of course we did too.
How did we fight? Did we do good or?
Well, the thing about our war is that America, when the Japanese bombed us, we went all out to win this war, because everybody went to work and everybody pulled together, and all of the new inventions and everything that we got, the new radar and everything that helped us before, you know, during those 4 years, the progress that we made was tremendous. And I'll show you some pictures on that between the fighter planes, the B-24, the big bombers that went in. And then by the end of the war, we had developed our big Super Fort bombers, the B-29 bombers. And so we made a lot of progress during the war. And so, to say, we finally survived, or we beat them, I guess, to surrender, and I guess we were the victors in the war. So I would say we won the war,
Yeah.
but there was a lot of progress made during those 4 years that we were in the war, due to the people of America that stuck together and all went in their full efforts for the war effort.
Cool. Do you want to show some of these pictures?
Sure. I say it's starting to get pretty old, but this is my wife when I was going with her in high school. So
Cool.
This is, I just want to show you some of the pictures of Okinawa. You know, Okinawa is a beautiful island. And this, of course, this is one of the old Okinawans. And, of course, these are some of our men, you know, getting the torpedoes and things ready. And this was some of the Japanese. See, we tried to get them all to surrender, but they wouldn't surrender. They'd rather die than surrender. And as a result, we had to drive them out with flamethrowers. They got in all these caves, and of course they could keep shooting from the caves, see, and they were protected. And that's why so many Americans were killed, because they had all these caves that they could shoot from. But here are some of the aircraft. You see that they shot down in Okinawa, and this is some of the Japanese people that were on there. And let's see, I'll show you some of these others. That's my dog. How you doing?